Jesús Anampa. Doctor Jesús Anampa es asistente de profesor de medicina clínica en el Departamento de Oncología Médica del Colegio de Medicina Albert Einstein del Centro Médico Montefiore. Concluyó sus estudios de medicina en la Universidad Peruana Cayetano Heredia en Lima, Perú. Es un médico practicante que se especializa en oncología médica de mama y en investigación de cáncer clínico y transnacional. Tiene un gran interés en los aspectos inmunológicos de la oncogénesis en el cáncer de mama, lo que lo hace enfocarse en la investigación sobre las diferencias del cáncer de mama y la infección por el virus de la inmunodeficiencia humana. Recibamos con un gran aplauso al doctor Jesús Anampa.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes a todos. Quiero empezar agradeciendo al comité organizador por extender la invitación para presentar un poco sobre lo que es la medicina de precisión en cáncer de mama enfocado al estudio steroids. Me voy a excusar, pero mi presentación va a ser en inglés, debido a que la mayoría de data está en el idioma inglés. No tengo ninguna disclosure nada que disclose. So, I'm going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about biomarkers. Then we'll speak a little bit about gene expression profiles, and then we'll talk about how to define the clinical utility of these biomarkers. So, what's a biomarker? A biomarker is a characteristic that is objectively measured and evaluated as an indicator of normal biology or pathogenic processes, or pharmacologic response to a therapeutic intervention. How can it help? It can provide information that is not otherwise available from clinical features, and also can help to direct or tailor therapy. Biomarkers in breast cancer have been developed back to the 1970s, with the first generation in protein expression for ER or PR, via immunohistochemistry. Then the second generation were the gene amplification, where they HER2 and new fish. The third generation are the gene expression, which is around 2004 with the OncoTAC-DX, MammaPrint, Breast Cancer Index, PAM50, EndoPredate. And the last, fourth generation is the mutation profiling that started around 2010, and now it's available in commercial, and some academic institutions are developing their own assays. Today we'll focus on the third generation biomarkers. What are the critical issues for biomarker? The first one is analytic validity. So how well does this biomarker measures what it claims to measure? So we have to assess for assay availability, reproducibility. The second issue is clinical validity, meaning how does this biomarker impact or what's the effect on any disease or any clinical outcome? Is it associated? And of course, the third issue is what's the clinical utility? And this is one of the most important because a lot of people developing biomarkers, and then how do we apply this into patient care? Does this lead to any treatment change? And if there's a treatment change, the benefits benefit a lot more or less than this? So this is a table about the level of evidence for different biomarkers that are currently developed. So, of course, a lot of them use archival specimens. And in the bottom, we see the category of these studies, category 1 being a prospective study, usually randomized, such as TENORX, Plan B, MINTAC, or any other large randomized trial. A category there is a prospective study that uses archival tissue. So this is usually studies that have been finished with all the clinical data, but when they started the study, they had already collected, biomarkers, plasma or tissue. So then you prospectively go back, assess your assay on those tissue, and then try to correlate this with the outcomes. And the category C is prospective or observational registry, such as the valid that we'll speak later. And now, as we know, the strongest evidence is a level 1 evidence for using a biomarker, and usually, as we can see in this table, for level 1 evidence, you need either a study from category A, or you need one study from category B that has a consistent result. So let's talk about gene expression profiles now. So as we know, breast cancer is not a homogeneous disease. In fact, we usually divide breast cancer by hormone receptors, ER, PR, HER2. No, breast cancer is heterogeneous. Even all the hormone receptor positive have different clinical outcomes. Even all the, not all the not positive will live the same amount of time. So we're talking about heterogeneous disease. So gene expression profile implements the identification of molecular pathways and gene signatures of breast cancer that can predict prognosis. It can also tailor the use of adjuvant therapies to predict benefit of therapy. This is in the right side is a picture of one of the first actually gene profiling assays that was developed by Chuck Perot in 2010, when he actually measured the gene profiling assays in about 300 samples, and what we found about 5 different profiles. The first one was the luminal A that expresses a lot of the estrogen receptor genes with very low proliferation genes such as the Ki67 or the ERBB. Subsequently was the luminal B that actually also had some degree of estrogen genes, but also expressed more genes in proliferation or actually the ERBB. The third group was the overexpression of the ERBB2 with very few expression of the estrogen receptor genes. And of course, the next one was the basal, which is like the triple negative that didn't express the estrogen, the progesterone, or the ERBB. And finally, the normal breast tissue. So, this is a table expressing or showing the current most available gene expression profiles in breast cancer. The first one and most utilized currently, actually, most evaluated has been the Oncotype that includes 21 genes. And the clinical utility of this biomarker is it's been used as a prognostic tool for ER-positive, HER2-negative breast cancer. Most of the literature supporting the use of Oncotype is from node-negative, and there are a couple of retrospective studies that support the use in node-positive. Also, the Oncotype DX has been shown to have predictive ability to responsive chemotherapy. The next assay, which has 70 genes, and actually has shown to be a prognostic biomarker, especially in those with clinical high-risk features. Subsequently, we have the Prosigna, which has 50 genes, and has also shown to be prognostic in ER-positive, HER2 non-negative or non-positive disease. The breast cancer index has 7 genes, and has shown to be prognostic for late recurrence in non-positive or non-negative. And actually, it's very interesting because since 2012, there's been studies showing that more than extended endocrine therapy, more than 5 years, is beneficial for some patients. And this assay actually can predict the benefit of extended endocrine therapy. The EndoPredict has 12 genes and has been shown to have a prognostic ability in ER-positive, HER2-negative, not positive, and not negative. So, in the left part of the screen, you have this is a meta-analysis of the most common gene expression profiles in breast cancer. And here we can see in the very left, they split all the profile, the gene profiles, and they only selected the proliferation genes. And as you can see, all of them have a similar performance, homogeneous, either in the upper part, which are the untreated patients, or in the bottom part, which is the treated patients. But however, when they only measure the non-proliferation genes on those assays, the performance is degraded. So what it suggests is that most of the gene assays actually have the power or the ability of predictive prognosis based on proliferation genes. In the right part of the screen, what they did is they evaluated every assay and how they can split or separate into different molecular profiles, ER positive, HER2 positive, HER2 negative. And in the y-axis, we have the proliferation index. And what we can see is that most of these actually classify the breast cancer subtypes basically on the proliferation degree. So again, supporting what they show in the prior table. So let's talk about the clinical utility of the 21 gene assay Oncotype DX that is the main topic for this talk. So initially the assay was developed, the first step of the assay development was to develop a method of RT-PCR in a fixed formalin and a paraffin neck tissue, how to measure the expression of genes. Subsequently, they looked for about 250 candidate genes that were selected from the literature, from genomic databases, and also from some experiments that were based on DNA. And then they tried to correlate or test the association between these 250 genes and clinical data from about 447 patients that were collected from 3 different trials. From this, they selected 16 cancer-related genes and 5 reference genes that were selected based on expression levels, and they compute a recurrence score based on this. So this is the 21 expression assay. As we can see, there are different groups: the proliferation group, the invasion group, the HER2 group, estrogen group, then the GSTM1, CD68, and BAC1. And there we also have in a red box the 5 reference genes from the Oncotype DX. In the right upper part, we have the algorithm and the coefficients of each of these gene groups expression. And the plus in each coefficient actually suggests that this group of genes is associated with a high recurrence and also will lead to a high recurrence score. And a negative coefficient will be associated with a decreased recurrence and a decreased recurrence score. Based on this, the authors actually split 3 categories on the recurrence score. If the recurrence score was less than 18, followed the low risk, 18 to 30 was in the intermediate risk, and 31 or more was in the high risk group. Of course, now that they had the assay, the next step was, as we discussed, is it useful? So the first validation was a prospective validation from archival tissues of the NSABP B14 trial. This group of patients actually were about 668 women with hormone receptor positive and actually non-negative breast cancer that had been treated with tamoxifen for about 5 years. And then what they saw is that the distant recurrence rates were different among the different groups, low, intermediate risk, and high risk. So the low risk had about a 7% 10-year distant recurrence rate versus 31% for the high risk. When they did a multivariate Cox model, adjusting for other measures such as age and tumor size, the recurrence score was statistically significant associated with distant recurrence. Of course, then the other endpoint of this trial was to assess a continuous risk of a recurrence with a continuous recurrence score. And again, as you can see here in this graphic, we see that the higher the recurrence score, the higher the rate of a distant recurrence as well. Interestingly, in the same trial, actually, what they found is they tried to see how much patients would benefit from tamoxifen. And interestingly, when they divided patients into 3 groups, low, intermediate, and high risk, they found that the patients with the low and intermediate risk did benefit from tamoxifen use, while those patients with high risk did not. So, as of now, we just thought that this assay has some prognosis features, so it will tell us what are the risks of recurrence based on recurrence score. So the next step was, okay, can we tailor treatment? Can this predict response to treatment like a chemotherapy? So the second study was done in 651 people from the NSABP B20 trial. These were postmenopausal women with hormone receptor positive, node-negative breast cancer that had been treated with tamoxifen, with or without chemotherapy. As we can see here, in the entire cohort, tamoxifen plus chemotherapy improved this distant recurrence-free compared to tamoxifen alone. This was statistically significant. When they did the same for the low-risk Oncotype group, there was no statistical difference. For the intermediate group, same story, was not statistically different. However, when they did the same for the high-risk group, they found that chemotherapy and tamoxifen actually improved distal recurrence-free compared to tamoxifen alone. How much was this improvement? So here we have a table about the benefit of chemotherapy per each Oncotype DX group. In the low-risk group, the benefit was only 1.1%. In the intermediate group, the benefit was about 1.8%. However, for those on the high-risk Oncotype more than 31, the benefit was about 27.6%. And again, multivariable models for interaction between recurrence score and chemotherapy was persistent when adjusted for age, tumor size, estrogen progesterone receptor expression, and tumor rate. And again, they try to look at it as a continuous variable and a similar story. As you can see, the higher the recurrence score, the higher the benefit from addition of chemotherapy to tamoxifen. So far, the assay has been validated in non-negative patients. As we know, the patients with breast cancer who have actual involvement have an increased risk of recurrence, and those are the ones that are usually recommended to use adjuvant chemotherapy. So the next step was to assess the prognosis of the Oncotype DX on node-positive breast cancer. This was done in 360 patients from the SWOG 8814 trial, postmenopausal women, hormone receptor positive, node-positive breast cancer who were treated with tamoxifen with or without chemotherapy with CAF. Again, the prognosis, the 21 gene assay was found to have prognosis value with a 10-year disease-free survival rate of 60% for those on the low risk, compared to only 42% for those on the high risk that were treated with tamoxifen monotherapy. And again, the survival was also improved. I mean, as I said, the Oncotype DX was also associated with survival based on different groups. Okay, the next step was, it is also predictive of chemotherapy benefit in the node positive. So in the same study, same group, interestingly, for those who had recurrence score of less than 18, there was no prediction value for the Oncotype DX. For those who had an intermediate score, neither was predicted value. However, for those who had a recurrence score more than 31, there was a significant predictive value of the Oncotype DX. In a different study, that actually, because most of the studies I presented have been based on postmenopausal with tamoxifen, but as we know, anastrozole, aromatase inhibitors actually are the most common drugs used in postmenopausal women. So another step was to validate the use of this assay in node-positive women who had also been exposed to anastrozole. And this was done in 306 women from the ATAC trial. And again, similar to the prior studies, the Oncotype DX was found to have predictive value in the node-positive, regardless if they were treated with tamoxifen or anastrozole. Interestingly, when this only evaluated the node-positive group, what they found is that at any recurrence score, those with node-positive had much higher score than those with node-negative. And when they split the node-negative, those with 4 or more nodes at any recurrence score had larger recurrence compared to those who had only 1 to 3 positive nodes. So the more nodes, the higher the recurrence score. Now we talk about prospective registry studies that have been done with this gene profiling assay. So the first is the CLADIT registry. This is the largest registry in Israel that started in 2006, and pretty much they collect all the data from people that have the Oncotype tested. They had about 1,800 people. 49 fell under the low risk, 41 in the intermediate, and 10% were in the high risk group. As expected, the use of adjuvant chemotherapy also increased as the recurrence score increased. The 5-year distant recurrence risk for the node-negative group actually is shown here, that was 0.8% for those with low risk, 3% for intermediate risk, and 8.6% for those with high risk. When they evaluated the node positive group, 709 patients, 42% had a micrometastatic, 37.2% had one lymph node, 15.2% had two lymph nodes, 5.2% had three lymph nodes, and about 53% fell under the low-risk oncotype group, 36% in intermediate, and only 10% in high-risk group. Again, adjuvant chemotherapy was used more frequently in the high-risk oncotype DX at 86.1% compared to the low-risk, which was only 7%. And again, the oncotype has also prognostic value on the not positive group. Interestingly, when they found they tried to assess for the benefit, bear in mind that this was a ratio study, so there's no randomization here. So when they look at the patient with low recurrence score less than 18, they found that the patients who got chemo versus those who did not get chemo, there was not a statistically significant difference for recurrence. For those with recurrence score 18 to 30, there was a statistical difference, with about 1% recurrence rate for those with chemo and 9.7% for those without chemo. So it was significant. And then they tried to look in this group, and they split this group in two, those from 18 to 25 and those from 26 to 30. And of course, what they found is that the 26 to 30 groups was a statistically significant group. And of course, then they did a multivariable model, and while adjust for the nodal status, tumor size and recurrence score group were statistically significant associated with detailed recurrence in this study. The next is a population-based study for the oncotype DX, the SEER registry, which is the NIH and also includes 14 population-based registries in the United States. It was done from January 2004 to December 2011. And again, they split from the same categorical point of 18 to 30, and more than 31. And in the non-negative group, they found about 40,000 women. In the non-negative, the chemotherapy use increased as the oncotype score increased, with 7% in the low risk to 69% in high risk. Interestingly, the 5-year breast cancer-specific mortality also increased, 0.4 for the low risk and as high as 4.4 in the high risk. They included about 4,600 patients with node positive, and again, the chemotherapy use increased with a higher oncotype DX, 22% chemotherapy used in the low risk versus 75% in the high risk. The 5-year breast cancer mortality in the node positive with recurrence score less than 18 was only 1%, compared to 14.3% for those with high risk. So from this, what we can see is that even the node positive, who usually are clinically indicated for chemotherapy, if they do have a recurrence score that is low, the breast cancer-specific mortality is not that high. So those are the people that could actually be spared of chemotherapy despite having a node involvement. Interestingly, age. So in this graphic, in the y-axis we have the breast cancer-specific mortality, and in the x-axis we have increasing groups of ages. The red is the high-risk oncotype DX, yellow is intermediate, and green is the low risk. As we can see, the breast cancer mortality for the high risk increases as patients get old. So even the older patients who are more than 8 years old have a breast cancer mortality of about 23%. In contrast, in the lower bottom box, we see the use of chemotherapy. The red dots are the chemotherapy used for the high-risk group, in yellow dots are the use of chemotherapy for the intermediate group, and the green dots are the use of chemotherapy for the lower group. What you can see is, as the age increases, the chemotherapy use decreases. So there's a paradox here. The higher the age, the higher the mortality, but the higher the age, clinicians tend to use less chemotherapy. In the non-positive group, of course, the breast cancer-specific mortality was high, but it was even higher as for the old people. And similar as in the non-negative, the older patients received less chemotherapy than the younger patients. In the younger patients, less than 40 years, chemotherapy use was 40%,
And in the older patient was only 50%. And we're talking about people with no positive and with high recurrence score. And after all this introduction, we come to the study that actually was presented in the annual meeting of the American Society of Clinical Oncology, named TAILORx, for trial assigning individualized options for treatments. It was a phase 2 trial of chemoendocrine therapy versus endocrine therapy alone in hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, node negative breast cancer, and who had an intermediate prognosis 21 gene recurrence score. It was actually done by the echocardiography and also their partner groups. So TAILORx. TAILORx was the largest study, prospective randomized study to validate the use of OncoTRDX in node-negative women. So the target population was hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, and node-negative breast cancer. Why was this the target population? Because that's about 50% of all breast cancers in the United States, and also because adjuvant chemotherapy is recommended for some patients. However, the benefit is small. As we can see here in the right plot, in the B20 trial, endocrine therapy with tamoxifen with or without chemotherapy with CMF, the 10-year distant recurrence-free survival improved from 88 to 92, only 4% when chemotherapy was added. This was statistically significant. However, did we need to treat all the patients with chemotherapy? So, as you can see, a lot of patients were or are overtreated with chemotherapy. So why did we use, or did they use the 21 gene assay? First of all, as we talked already, there have been 2 prospective validation studies in hormone receptor negative, node-negative breast cancer. In the B14 trial, low recurrence with endocrine therapy had very low recurrence. In the B20 trial, there was a large chemo benefit for those patients with high recurrence score. However, we did not know what to do with the intermediate group. So there was therapeutic equipoise to use chemo versus chemoendocrine in this group. So, as we discussed, the cutoff points for OncoTRDX has been 18 and 31. So, what happened with TAILORx? TAILORx had to adjust the recurrence score. Why? First of all, the TAILORx population excluded HER2 positive patients. The NSBP20 and B14 not necessarily excluded HER2 negative, the HER2 positive patients. So therefore, in those trials, in the evaluation trials, there were subsets of people that did express HER2, and the expression of HER2, as we saw in the algorithm, can actually lead to increased recurrence scores. So we expected to have a different recurrence score distribution. Then, the recurrence score assay has been used selectively in practice when there was therapeutic equipoise. For those patients actually, so had been used for patients who typically had intermediate grade tumors, 1 to 2 centimeters in size. Therefore, in TAILORx, there was expected to have a larger group in the mid-range group. So, the recurrence score range had to adjust, but also had to preserve the prediction value in the high risk, and also minimize the potential for anti-treatment. So these are the original cut points, 18 to 31. And then with the subsequent analysis, the intermediate group was modified to 11 to 25. Of course, before the study was run, they had to redo it again and see the predictive value of the new cutoff points for the intermediate group. And again, the low risk, which now is 0 to 10, there was no benefit for chemo, in addition to endocrine therapy, as expected, similar to the prior cutoff points. For the intermediate group, 11 to 25, again, there was no significant association for addition of chemotherapy to endocrine therapy. And as we discussed, in the NSABP20, Addition of chemotherapy to endocrine therapy in the high-risk group improved the distant recurrence by about 27%. Here, with the new cutoff point in the high-risk group, the distant recurrence changed from 63 to 88, which is about 25%. So it was comparable to a 27% with the prior cutoff points. The group of interest for TELAREX was not the low, was not the high, but the intermediate risk group. So what were the eligibility criteria for this trial? Women with invasive breast cancer, age 18 to 75, had to be node negative, ER and PR positive by local lab, HER2 negative by local lab, tumor size 1.1 to 5 centimeters, or 6 to 1 centimeter, and an intermediate grade. Of course, women had to be willing to receive chemotherapy treatment as assigned by the randomization. What were the primary endpoints for TELAREX? So, for the main study, which was the intermediate risk group 11 to 25, the primary endpoint was invasive disease-free survival, which was described from the time from the randomization to either distant recurrence, local regional recurrence, contralateral breast cancer, other second primary cancer, or death. There was secondary endpoints was distant recurrence-free interval, which was the time from randomization to distant recurrence, and another secondary endpoint was relapse-free interval, which was the time from randomization to distant recurrence or local regional recurrence. And of course, overall survival was defined as the time from randomization to death. So the study group patients between 2006 to 2010. About 10,000 women were required for this study, and there were 4 arms. The first arm was the Arm A, which was the low recurrence score group, included about 1,600 women, and these women were assigned to endocrine therapy without chemo. Arm D, in the right part of the screen, is the high-risk group with an oncotype 26-100, included about 1,300 women, and they were assigned to receive endocrine therapy with chemotherapy. And then we come to the mid-range recurrence score, 11 to 25. This is the group that was randomized, included about 6,700 women, and they were randomized. The randomization was stratified based on menopausal status, planned chemotherapy, planned radiation, and recurrence score. And they were randomized to either Arm B, which was the experimental arm of chemotherapy alone, or Arm C, which was the standard arm of endocrine therapy plus chemotherapy. Each group had about 3,300 patients. The initial results from TELAREX were from the low-risk group. These results were actually published in 2015 in the New Journal of Medicine, and pretty much this was to validate prospectively the results that had already been validated with retrospective studies from archival tissue. In this study, what they found is that overall, the low-risk group had very good outcomes. The 5-year invasive disease-free survival rate was 93.8. The relapse-free interval was 98.7. The distant recurrence-free interval was 99.3. And the overall survival rate was 98%. So this just confirmed this data that had been already described by the other studies. However, these results actually helped the Oncotype DX to be included in the AJCC Cancer Staging Manual 8 edition. So Oncotype now is used to stage patients with breast cancer who are hormone receptor positive and node negative only. So now coming to the results that a lot of people have been waiting for about 14 years. These results were presented in ASCO meeting in last June and were published in the same day actually in the New England Journal of Medicine. So the statistical design for the intermediate group. This was a non-inferiority design. And all the sample size was power for the intermediate group. As we saw in the prior table, about 65% of the whole study were in the intermediate group. And then it was planned to have an intention to treat for the primary analysis, but also there was a street analysis. The hazard ratio margin was 1.322 for invasive disease-free survival, which corresponds to about a 5-year invasive disease-free survival change from 90% to 87%. It was believed that it was a clinically significant change. The null hypothesis was no difference, and the type 1 error was 10% one-sided, and the type 2 error was 5%. The p-values that will be shown are from a stratified log-rank test, and the hazard ratios that will be shown are from stratified proportional hazard models. The sample size had been adjusted initially to non-adherence rate of 12%, and the full information was actually released from the ECO guideline to the statistical team after 835 invasive disease-free events happening. There was also, as per protocol, exploratory interaction tests for subgroups that may derive some benefit of chemotherapy. So results. About 6,700 people randomized. Median age was 55 years, and 33% were actually younger than 50 years. 63% had a tumor of 1 to 2 centimeters, and about 57% had an intermediate grade histology. 74% fell under the low-risk clinical category, and 26 had a high-risk clinical risk category. Systemic treatment, endocrine therapy. The endocrine therapy was comparable, there was comparable adherence and duration in both arms. Indeed, about 35% of women actually underwent extended endocrine therapy beyond 5 years. Among postmenopausal women, 90% of them used aromatase inhibitors, and among premenopausal, about 15% used ovarian function suppression. In the chemotherapy group, the most common regimen for chemotherapy was docetaxel and cyclophosphamide in 56% of women, and also an anthracite-based regimen in 36%. There was about 12% of non-adherence rate to chemotherapy assignment. Coming to the primary results. The primary endpoint of invasive disease-free survival. This happened after 836 invasive disease-free events happened, and about 40% of these were recurrent as first, and 23.8 were distant recurrence. So as we can see here, endocrine therapy was shown to be non-inferior to chemoendocrine. We see here the hazard ratio was 1.8, the confidence interval was 0.94, 1.24, and this confidence interval did not cross with a margin of 1.322 that was specified in the statistical design, and the p-value was 0.26. For the secondary endpoint of distant relapse-free interval, again, endocrine therapy alone was shown to be non-inferior to chemotherapy and endocrine therapy, with a hazard ratio of 1.1, confidence interval of 0.85 to 1.41, and the p-value was 0.48. Similar for the relapse-free interval, endocrine therapy was non-inferior to chemoendocrine, hazard ratio was 1.1, and for overall survival, similar story. Endocrine therapy was shown to be non-inferior to chemoendocrine therapy, with a hazard ratio of 0.99 and a p-value of 0.89. Here, we show the disease-free survival probability for the 4 arms on tablets. Arm A, recurrence score 0 to 10, those were treated with endocrine therapy alone. Arm B are the intermediate group that were randomized to endocrine therapy alone. Arm C was the intermediate group that were randomized to chemo and endocrine therapy, and Arm D was the high-risk group that was assigned to chemotherapy. As we can see, the disease-free survival probability was different, and especially lower for the high-risk group, which confirmed what had been already described in the other studies. When we speak, when we see the 9-year event rate, those with very low recurrence score, 0 to 10, had only 3% distant recurrence with endocrine therapy alone. So this is the group that should not get chemotherapy. In the intermediate group, with score of 11 to 25, there was only 5% recurrence rate overall. And when they compared the chemo versus no chemo groups, there was less than 1% difference for all the endpoints. For the high-risk group, with a score of 26 to 100, despite chemotherapy, there was about 13% distant recurrence with chemo and endocrine therapy. So this is the group that you cannot actually forgo chemo. Then, there was an exploratory analysis to assess for interactions to see if there was any variable that can affect or can interact with the chemo benefit. And as we can see, there was no statistically significant interaction between chemo and recurrence score in different groups, or tumor size, or race, or menopausal status, or clinical risk categories. However, there was statistically significant interaction between chemotherapy and age. The p-values for the interaction was 0.03 for invasive disease-free survival and 0.02 for relapse-free interval. And then there was also an interaction between chemotherapy effect and a combination of age and recurrence score for invasive disease-free survival, and also for a combination of menopause and recurrence score interacting with chemo benefit, affecting invasive disease-free survival. Both of them were statistically significant. And when they assessed the age, they found that actually those younger than 50 are the ones that the interaction was even stronger, with a 0.004. So, there was a signal that there might be an interaction with age. So, they tried to do a subgroup analysis for those women who were younger than 50, who were about 2,200, and with recurrence score between 11 to 25. And there could be some benefit of chemotherapy for this group. And when they even split further, those with recurrence score 16 to 20 had 9% fewer invasive disease-free survival events, including 2% fewer distant recurrence. And for those with score 21 to 25, there were about 6% fewer invasive disease-free survival events, mainly consistent of fewer distant recurrence. For those with score 0 to 15, the prognosis was good with endocrine therapy alone. Only 3% distant recurrence, and of course there's no evidence of chemo benefit for women who had recurrence score 11 to 15. Then what they tried is to see the association between continuous recurrence score in the intermediate group and non-GR distant recurrence rate, of course, stratified by treatment arms. In the right side, we see the older group, more than 50. There is not much difference. Both curves, chemo alone and chemo therapy, are pretty much parallel. However, in the left side of the screen, when we see those women that were younger than 50, we see that at the beginning the curves are almost together, but then they start to split up. So yes, actually again, an interaction between recurrence score and age for distant recurrence. So the primary conclusions from terrorists. Recurrence score 11 to 25, endocrine therapy was shown to be non-inferior to chemotherapy and endocrine therapy. So the study met their primary goal. For recurrence score 0 to 10, distant recurrence is very low, 2 to 3% with endocrine therapy alone, no need of chemotherapy. For recurrence score 25 to 100, significantly high event rates, despite the use of chemotherapy and endocrine therapy. And the observations also, as we discussed, there is an interaction between age and recurrence score, with some chemo benefit for women 50 or younger with a recurrence score 15 to 25. And this benefit actually was even stronger for those with recurrence score 21 to 25. The other question was to see how was the distribution of the recurrence score intolerance compared to the clinical practice. So on the left side we have the recurrence score intolerance, and in the right we have the genomic health data. And as we can see, pretty much similar. So this allows us to say that the results from terrorists could be easily generalized to the population that used oncotherapy in clinical practice. The other trial, just a few words about other trials that have been also assessed in 21 gene assay. The Plan B trial was a randomized trial for women younger than 75, not positive, or not negative with high risk. And if the recurrence score was less than 11, they went to endocrine therapy. But if the recurrence score was more than 11, they were randomized to 2 different chemotherapies. In the left side, we see the outcomes by recurrence groups in the Plan B trial. For the low-risk group, who only received endocrine therapy, the 5-year disease-free survival was 94.2, and the 5-year overall survival was 99, so very good outcomes. For the intermediate group, actually, who received chemotherapy, the 5-year disease-free survival was 94.3 and 97%. And for the high-risk group that also received chemotherapy, the 5-year disease-free survival was lower, actually, at 84.2, and the 5-year overall survival was also lower than 93. Multivariable models for disease-free survival in this trial show that a lot of the variables were significantly associated in univariate analysis, including recurrence score, nodal status, tumor stage, tumor grade, Ki67, ER/PR expression, and IHC4. However, when they did a multivariable analysis, they found that Ki67, ER/PR expression, and IHC4 were not significant. Another assay that has been in practice actually has been the mammogram. So let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the MINDAC trial. So the goal of the MINDAC trial was to evaluate clinical pathological risk and comparing, and also the 70 gene signature risk. So based on those risks, patients were split in 3 groups. The first group in the left are the patients who had high risk for both clinical and also genomic signatures. That's about 2,700. In the right side, we have patients that had low risk for both clinical and genomics. It was about 1,800. In the middle, we have the discordant cases. Either those cases had high clinical risk, but low genomic risk, or those who had low clinical risk, but high genomic risk. These people were randomized, and depending on which randomization group, they would be treated using the clinical pathological risk or the gene risk. So, let's talk about the groups. In the low risk group, include about 41%. The high risk for clinical and genomic group include 27%. And the discordant group include only about 32%. And this is the group that was randomized. So as we can see in this trial, the intermediate group that had discordant was actually a smaller group compared to the low risk genomic and clinical, or high risk genomic and clinical. The clinical strategy. Based on the clinical strategy, about 50% of patients would receive chemotherapy. Based on the genomic strategy in the right, about 36% of people would receive chemotherapy. So as you can see, there will be, if we use the genomic strategy in this study, we will have a decrease of 14% reduction in the chemotherapy use. So the study actually was, the primary endpoint of the study, primary analysis was based on this small group of those who had high clinical risk, who actually are suggested to get adjuvant chemotherapy, but whose genomic risk was low. So the goal was to see, among those with high clinical features, can we use this genomic assay to spare chemotherapy? So the study was powered only for this group, and only for the no chemotherapy group. Overall, it was about 644 patients in this group for the primary analysis, which is about 10%. And the statistics for this was a 95% two-sided confidence interval for the 5-year distant metastasis-free survival rate has to be compared to control historical rate of 92%. So, overall, the study observed in this group who had high clinical risk but low genomic risk, they saw that the 5-year distant metastasis-free survival was 94.7%, and the 95% confidence interval was 92.5 and 96.2, which excluded 92%, which was the comparison or the limit for the primary analysis. So this was a positive study, and what the study shows is that the chemotherapy could be spared in these people that have high clinical risk and low genomic risk. Interestingly, when they tried to assess the benefit, and bear this in mind, this study was not powered to assess the benefit of chemotherapy use. What they found is, among this group with high clinical risk and low genomic risk, the chemotherapy achieved a 5-year distant metastasis-free survival of 95.9, and it was the chemotherapy increased from 94.4 to 95.9, the distant metastasis-free survival. So there was about 1.5% increase. And of course, there's a question, is 1.5% clinically significant? And that's still in the air. For some clinicians, they believe that it's significant, so this test could be used to predict chemotherapy benefit. For our group, it's not that significant, and they don't think this will be supporting of the use of chemotherapy for this group. Interestingly, we just talk about 2 assays. I mean, I don't have the time to go through all the assays, but this study actually compare several gene expression assays in the same group of patients to see how they can select or how they group the patients. So there was about 302 patients, and they used Oncotype DX, Prosigna of the PAM50, MammaPrint, MammaTyper, NextCore Surprise, IC4. And the subtype classification was done by the blueprint, the MammaTyper, or the Prosigna. So the results show that the Oncotype DX classified a high proportion of patients as being low risk, about 82%. Then compared to the others, such as Prosigna, that was only 65.5%, the IC4 was 72%, the MammaPrint 61%. Interestingly, the 5 tests show only modest agreements when splitting the patients in high or low risk. 39% of patients were classified uniformly as either low intermediate or high risk. The all 3 subtype tests assigned about 59.5 to 62% of tumors to be in luminal A subtype. However, only 40% were classified as luminal A by all the 3 tests. What this tells us is that even though these tests categorize patients in low high risk, they don't predict the same risk. They don't use the same values, they don't use the same variables. So this was another study that compared the performance of 6 prognostic signatures for ER-positive breast cancer, included 700 patients, postmenopausal, who received endocrine therapy alone in the ATAC trial. The breast cancer index, the recurrence score Oncotype, the recurrence score from the Prosigna, and the EPCLIN. In the left side, we have the non-negative, and in the right side, we have the non-positive. So let's focus on the non-negative. As we can see, almost all assays categorize most of the patients as being low risk. 61.8% for the breast cancer index, 62% for the Oncotype, 53% for the Prosigna, and 72.6% for the EPCLIN. When they categorize for high risk, actually only small group. It was only 14% by breast cancer index, 61% by Oncotype DX, 16.1% by recurrence Prosigna assay, and 27.4% by EPCLIN. In the not positive, in the right side, interestingly, the EPCLIN categorized among the not positive, 76.5% were high risk, and only 23.5% were low risk. So most of the patients with not positive were high risk. as per the claim, similar for the Prosigna recurrence assay-based. However, when we see the recurrence score oncotype, we see that among the not positive, most of them actually were still low risk, about 57.4%, and only 10.9% were classified as being high risk. Again, as you can see, all these assays seem to predict risk based on different features. So they provide different information, and this information should not be interchangeable. So here we just added the data that represents from TAILORx. For the non-negative, the 10-year recurrence risk was 17%, was 3% for endocrine therapy, 5% for endocrine therapy without chemotherapy in the intermediate group, and 13% in the high-risk group, despite chemotherapy use. And for the not positive, we have the data from the Plan B study. We see that the low-risk group had about 5% 10-year risk with endocrine therapy alone. 2 studies are ongoing that we are expecting. We are waiting for the results. The Optima trial is included hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, not positive women, or no negative and large tumor, and they're going to be randomized to 2 groups: control group, which received chemo and hormone therapy, or test-directed therapy group, which is going to be based not on the oncotype but on the Prosigna test. And based on the Prosigna test, those with high risk score will be assigned to chemo and hormone therapy, and those with low risk will be assigned to hormone therapy. The responder is the TAILORx version for the not positive. So in the responder trial, or SWOG 1007, women with hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, they must have not positive disease, 1 to 3 lymph nodes, and if they have an oncotype DX score less than 25, they will be randomized to chemotherapy and hormone therapy, or hormone therapy alone. Conclusions from this talk. Breast cancer is a heterogeneous disease. Gene expression profiling implements the identification of molecular pathways and gene signatures of breast cancers to predict prognosis and tailor the use of adjuvant therapies. As we saw recently, different assays classify patients differently, and this information should not be interchangeable. The 10A1 gene assay has prognostic information and predictive value. It's usually supported by the 8 AJCC edition for prognosis, and the NCCN and the ASCO guidelines for prognosis and prediction, actually. As we have presented TAILORx studies for non-negative patients, those with recurrence score less than 10, endocrine therapy alone achieved very good 9-year distant recurrence rate of 3%. For those with intermediate risk, 11 to 25, endocrine therapy was not inferior to chemotherapy and endocrine therapy, and there was some benefit for women younger than 50 with recurrence score 15 to 25, and with a greater impact on distant recurrence for those with scores 21 to 25. We are waiting results from the responder trial for those with no positive disease and recurrence score less than 25. And in the area of personalized medicine, the ability to individualize adjuvant therapy for breast cancer continues to evolve and improve. I want to thank Joseph Sparano, who was the principal investigator of this trial, for providing the slides and actually the material I'm presenting today. The American Society of Clinical Oncology for allowing me to share some of the material that I presented, TAILORx investigators, and TAILORx participants. And with this, I'm done. Thank you.